On the bench, we have a 1958 vintage Omega Seamaster. In our small little world, a gentleman I used to play pool with in Arizona, he saw my channel on TikTok and he wanted to know if I would work on this watch, but with a little bit of a twist. He wasn't sure if he wanted to pay for the servicing, so we came up with a neat little deal where I was going to buy the watch and fix it. And once it was done, he simply wanted to be the first person that I offer the watch back to for whatever price I felt like was fair. And if he decided that he didn't want the watch afterwards, then I could sell it to whoever. So let's get to work. This is the Omega Caliber 501 automatic movement. And on the time grapher, the watch is running okay for its age, losing quite a bit of time each day, but it has a decent amplitude and a beat error. First thing we're going to do is remove the movement from the case, which you can see has a little bit of rust around the edges. Not bad enough to where it affected the movement, but definitely a little bit of water damage sometime in its past. The dial looks pretty good. Definitely a little worn, but not terrible. The crystal is in horrible shape. First, we're going to remove these screws on the side of the movement. This is going to allow us to take the dial off. And on the front, you can see the rust damage, just kind of a top layer on the dial side of the movement, but it's not terrible. And you can see it matches the back of the dial as well. Starting out on the dial side of the movement, we're going to take off the cannon pinions. And then it's really important to understand when you're working on a watch, the first thing you want to do is remove the balance. Your screwdriver could slip, you could drop screws into the hairspring. You want to try to avoid all damage to this balance wheel by removing it first. Then we're going to go ahead and take off the automatic winding works. The rotor just slides off once you remove that little lock-in bar. Disassembling the rest of the swatch is very straightforward. Once you remove the automatic winding works, you'll have access to the mainspring barrel and the winding mechanism, the train wheel and the train wheel bridge, the pallet fork. It's all very easy to take apart a watch. It's a little bit more difficult to put it back together. The next thing that I want to do with the naked base plate is remove the jewels for the Inca Block shock protection system. I'm going to discuss in a little bit how that works, but you just remove this little spring and the jewel comes out and you clean it with some isopropyl alcohol. The balance staff goes through that little hole right there, and that's what it rotates on. Really quick, I wanted to show people what you should do if you're new to watchmaking to help you organize your screws. If you buy a jewelry box with one of these drawers that's partitioned, you can put each individual part with its screw separate from the other parts so that when you run things through a cleaner, you can kind of take a picture of it before, take all the parts out, put it through the cleaner, put them back. Any way that you can keep the screws separate is going to help you when it comes to reassembling this movement. There's the hands, which are pretty rusted. We have this gasket that has to come out and be replaced. I'm going to be using this little container with some isopropyl alcohol and a paintbrush to be cleaning the sensitive parts of this watch and the base plate. First thing, you want to put the balance wheel back on the movement. This is going to help you remove that cap jewel from the Inca Block shock protection system in a stable way. So once the balance wheel is installed and it's secure, you can go ahead and start removing the jewels. So right there is the top jewel for the Inca Block system. And I'll show you on this diagram here, the balance staff that runs through the balance wheel right in the center is what rotates on these jewels, and it rotates many times per day. And just those three components on the right are what's going to come out. It's the spring, the top jewel, and the hole jewel. And there it is on the bottom. So you'll see me here removing them. So there they are, very, very tiny. I'm using a microscope here to inspect them to make sure they're not damaged. And then I'll be moving them from that Rodico into the isopropyl alcohol. You want to be very careful, just dab it a little bit. I like to use Post-it notes to dry the jewels on, because when you move it from the isopropyl onto the Post-it note, when the Post-it note itself dries, then you know that the jewels themselves are dry. So we'll do that, work on the top, then the bottom one. So here's the base plate after putting it in the isopropyl and using the brush. I also use a soft Brillo pad to try to scrape away that top layer of rust. You want to be really careful because you don't want to damage the metal on the movement, but you need to get the rust out of there. That's pretty key. And that's before and after. It came out well though. Here are all the parts laid out. The movement parts themselves have already been run through the ultrasonic cleaner, although I'm waiting to do the case until the movement itself is reassembled. All right, let's get started on putting this movement back together. Putting on gears to any movement it's pretty sensitive. You have to make sure that the pivots for these are going through the jewel holes, because if you tighten down these bridges and the pivots are not through the jewel holes on both sides, you will damage the pivots on the gears themselves. And it's pretty hard to find vintage gears for an exact movement. For example, if I broke the escape wheel, I'd have to search on Google an escape wheel for an Omega Caliber 501. It's almost often never new stock, and it comes off of another movement. Sometimes you have to buy an entire donor movement just to get that one part. So you do want to be very careful when installing gears. Here I'm just oiling up some of the points. You always oil the pivot points, and you oil anything that comes together, like two contact surfaces, metal on metal, like the gear that's going to rotate for the winding works. You want to just put a little bit of oil on that. Installing the click spring, a little bit of oil underneath the click spring itself. This is a split gear, and it's split for the purpose of the automatic winding works. The automatic rotor is connected to the top half of that gear, so it can wind the mainspring barrel separate of winding it manually. Everything has been reassembled, and we'll put the balance wheel back in. To our pleasant surprise, it starts right back up, which is always a good feeling. It's a little nerve-wracking putting a balance wheel in. Sometimes things don't work, and then you have to go troubleshooting. Can slow you down big time. Back on the time grapher, and with just a little tweak on the balance wheel, this thing is running damn near perfect. 225 degrees of amplitude, zero point 0.4 milliseconds of beat error, which is well within limits for something that is almost 69 years old. Now that the movement is assembled and working, we're going to start working on the case. This crystal is in pretty rough shape. We're going to be putting it through the ultrasonic cleaner and then using some very fine sandpaper to get it back into good health, and we'll be doing the same with the case back. The main case I have here in the isopropyl to try to get rid of some of this rust around the outside. Here I am just putting in a little bit of elbow grease. It's probably going to need a lot more elbow grease. And there you go. We got most of it off, which is good. I'll probably try to get the rest off through the same process just over and over again until it comes off. The crystal coming out of the ultrasonic cleaner looks good. And we're going to go ahead and use some 3000 grit sandpaper, which is really, really, really fine sandpaper. You don't want to use something that's not fine, and you may end up damaging the crystal or ruining the structural integrity of the crystal. So you'll just use this bit of sandpaper on the surface, and then we'll do the same thing for the case back. But we are not going to do it for the case itself, because this is gold plated, and if you use any sort of sandpaper on the plating, you'll just kind of rub the microns of gold away, and then you won't have a gold plated watch anymore. For the gold plated case, we're just going to use this very soft pad on the bench grinder to polish it up, along with some metal polish. And here's the case after we buffed it a little bit and used a little bit of polish on it. It's not going to be perfect. It still has some scrapes and cuts. I can't electroplate things myself. If I could, it would be in much better shape, but the case back looks a lot better. And this crystal looks a lot better than it did before. It's still going to have some small scratches on it, but I'm all about using original parts. And now we're going to be reinstalling the dial. I did remove the layer of rust off the backside of the dial using a very light Brillo pad. You don't want to use any chemicals or isopropyl on the dial because you could very easily ruin it, but it came out pretty well. And now we'll be fitting the dial back on the front and installing the screws that go on the side to hold the dial in place. Pressing the hands back on, and it looks pretty good. And now we'll reinstall it back in the case. Here, we're just throwing on the brand new gasket that's been oiled up, and this thing is ready to go. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, comment. It helps a ton, and this watch is ready.